Okay, well, welcome back to another edition of our Product Management Book Club. We are again looking at Product Operations by Melissa Perry and Denise Tills. And at this point, we've gotten past, how do you introduce product ops at your organization? How do you start off, if you are the person that's kind of starting that initial conversation and building this into the org? And now we've gotten to part six here, building and scaling a product operations function. So, we've got our first person in there. And now we're saying, okay, how big does this team need to be? Because obviously we don't want to put 10 people in there and figure out that, people are stepping on each other's toes, and maybe we only needed three or so. So I think this is really interesting and very important for a team that's focused on optimization and efficiency. Obviously, the first place to start is staffing that team itself. Um, yeah, so let's go ahead and just jump right in. So, one of the things that I thought was the most interesting just starting out in this section was that um, this section here at the end says the product operations team focuses on being indispensable, but understands that its ultimate goal is to work themselves out of a problem. So, I like this idea of designing systems that will work without you because I think a lot of times we get stuck in this place where we build a system, but we're integral to that system. And I think an important part of product ops is that, we have to be able to build a system that's self-sufficient and then we can pass it on to someone else so that we can work on solving another problem. So, very important there. And I think good to keep in mind, particularly for this section, is we're building a team that can be reused, not one that specifically will stay in one place and is continually solving that issue.
Yeah, that's a very good point because a lot of times when your product kind of piggybacks off of project management, and the definition of project management is there's a beginning, there's an end.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when that project's over or that product's built and ready to deploy, that's it. You disperse the team and you move on. And you make a very interesting point, calling that out that this is operations. So we have more of a long-term mindset, a mindset of sustainability. And that speaks volumes because now what you have is continuity from the idea through development to the deployment stage and then moving on. So it's a very, very important distinction to call out. Good point.
Thanks. And I think it's interesting that we then move to this idea of, okay, if we're looking at moving from problem to problem, what problems should we solve? And I think this is something that we were talking about before, where, this idea that product managers, product operations managers, you can't fix everything, right? We talked about in previous chapters how to prioritize, how to find the easy wins, how to find the things that product ops should focus on. And I think we're kind of bringing it back into this conversation because if we're talking about a team of people, we might see 100 problems that need solving, and it's like, okay, to solve those 100 problems, we need like 20 product operations people. But in reality, maybe we only need to really solve 10 of those problems, or maybe only 10 of them are product operations problems, which would only require like a team of two to three. So I think now that we've gotten to a place where we're scaling, we can open that conversation again. And one of the things they said to watch out for is product ops picking up anything that's kind of on the table. So the phrase here they said, if no one wants to do it, why not pass it to product ops? Avoid this at all costs. Um, and I think that that's product ops is like product management is kind of at the nexus of so many things that it's very easy to pick up anything. And so I think there's the important distinction here is that product ops can touch any part of the organization, but not necessarily any project needs to go to product ops. It can be housed anywhere, but specifically we're looking for like operational things and things that we can, you know, turn around quickly and really provide that operational benefit.
Yeah, good point. Because it's very easy with this product ops being so efficient and things all of a sudden become synthesized and streamlined to make it a bit of a catch-all to solve all problems using this ecosystem. But that's not what we want to do, right? So as you're
Yeah.
pointing out, we want things that are very centric to leveraging the product ops and operations, and with prioritization being front of mind, so that we don't, because it can be very easy to turn that inefficiency into a bottleneck if we're just throwing everything down that pipeline because it looks, it feels, and it's flowing well. But we want to keep
Yeah.
it doing. We want to maintain efficiencies and the sustainability we just finished talking about. So we really have to streamline what's going into that pipeline. It's a very important point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you're just saying, talking about the pipeline, like then we start getting into some of that process for process sake that we talked about at the beginning. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, definitely important there. And they're saying, particularly that you're starting out as one person, when you're the only person, they're saying that you're setting the standard, you're setting the expectations for product operations at this org. And there's something that's both easier and harder about that. On one hand, you can make those decisions, you can make those calls, but you also have to be setting up a structure that then other people can follow once you start bringing people on. So kind of like you were saying here, important to get these things right, because this is the foundation that you're building.
Yeah, and it does reinforce that idea of sustainability,
Mhm.
maintaining efficiencies, and that type of thing. Because if we're not building, for lack of a better word, a solid foundation that can continue, again, be operational, then all of a sudden this magnificent ecosystem and pipeline that we set up, becomes counterproductive.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of that ecosystem and filling it up, I really like the chart that they have on page 194. So they talk about filling out the org and they say, okay, like who are you looking for? And I have to admit, when I was thinking about this, I know for our product operations team, we brought on, a couple program managers, some people to manage the specific projects, but we didn't think of it as much in terms of, oh, we need a specialist in this area, because we still kind of viewed ourselves as, sort of a jack of all trades role, for better or for worse. But I like what they do here in that they have not only specific roles, but they also have timelines when they think you might be looking for these specific people. So particularly jumping down to a team of several. So you've moved past your initial two hires, you're looking at a team of about five or so. And instead of what I might have thought, which is, some program managers or, several product operations leads, you have a product tools manager, you've got a product data analyst, and you've got a user market insights analysis. So, analyst, sorry. Uh, and so we're seeing these start to align with the columns that they were talking about previously, um, of product operations. And I'm kind of intrigued because I know this is just a guideline and stuff like that. Part of me thinks, is this specific to certain orgs? Is this would this work for most organizations regardless of what they're working on? And I guess you just kind of adjust it. But it's curious to me that they would specialize so early. You only have a team of five, and you're already looking for those kind of siloed roles in a way.
Yeah, scaling, it is interesting the way they roadmap this scaling. Team of one or two, a year. But then actually it's two, because you got the product officer and you've got the ops lead, because now we're flowing into the ops. And
Hmm.
this is where the ops, starts to become functional. And they give it about a year, right? They say, okay, and I suppose that in that early stage, we even maybe want to be thinking along those lines so that we can plan and roll into that very smoothly. And to your point, then we start to scale at about that year timeline, and it goes all the way out for an entire another year. And that gives you a few more resources. And then another year, just another year after that, it continues. So all of this, when you look at the growth, though, is operational, and that operation starts to kind of morph itself. And then you've got directors of these various siloed aspects of operations when you get out to that maturing phase. So
Hmm.
now we're talking about, who owns the embedded capabilities, uh, processing governance, and then very specifically qualitative and quantitative insights. So you really start to get very granular as you scale. So not only are we getting bigger, but we're getting a little bit more specialized or maybe
Mm-hmm.
focused is what's happening here as we move on. And I suppose that does help with that sustainability quite a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like the fact that it also shows, a lot of times when people are hired on in an org, they want to know what's the future of this role, how could I potentially advance within the organization? And so I like the fact that this also kind of accounts for growth, right? Like you would assume that the director of product ops in the team of several, maybe that person would be promoted to VP of product ops, and all of the people that reported to them are then becoming directors of their own kind of sections. So I think that this is not only good for planning purposes, but also if you're while you're working on staffing and then also while you're pitching this to potentially whoever you need approval for product ops, this is a very helpful org chart just thinking about um, that staffing section.
Yeah, it wouldn't be. I don't think look at it in this way. I guess you kind of want to think you need to fill it out a bit. But this roadmap and this kind of growth timeline, scaling layout here does give you something to kind of strategize towards, so you can realize that sustainability in an efficient way. This is really good.
Yeah. So then in the next section, they kind of break this down a little bit. They talk more about the particular categories that we've discussed before. Um, and I like this section. Maybe this would have been a good one to talk about before, but they're talking about figuring out what profile is correct for the role. So, they talk about the fact that not every part of product operations is the same. And we've seen this kind of throughout that story that they've been using to organize these chapters where specific needs call for specific skills, and so we want to align those as well as we can. So um you know they start this one talking about data and insights, and interestingly they point out finding someone who's interested and potentially skilled in this area in the organization first. So just because we need a product data analyst, we don't immediately go to the staffing board and be like, okay, product data analyst, let's find them. In the story that they told, they found someone who's on the data team who had some experience that they thought might be interested, who had shown an aptitude for these kind of skills, and they kind of slowly brought them on to see if they would be interested, to see if it would work. And when you think about it, that makes a lot of sense. Someone that's familiar with the org, um, that already has kind of that background knowledge, and it's a very kind of low risk way to do that. Um, so I like the fact that they remind us of that. They also give us some insights in here. What are we looking for in someone who might be really good at manipulating data? And instead of, just a list of skills, they say an ideal candidate would be a master of Excel, a whiz at formulas. SQL is fun for them. So giving us some different descriptions there and straying away from just the list of skills. So I really like the fact that they talk a little bit about each of these sections, talk about what you might be looking for in this hire, um, and what you need as far as even things like, leadership skills, communication skills. So that's cool to see them break that down so we have an idea not just what is the title for this, but what kind of a person are we looking for to fill this
That
this role.
that is so true, because I think when I look at some of these roles, I have a preconceived notion as to what I believe some of those skills might be, just based on traditional um, you know ways, roles or personas that fill those roles.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. As you look at this operations perspective on it, some of the characteristics are slightly different than I kind of imagined, so to
Yeah.
speak. And so for them to kind of say, well, yep, let's paint this picture out. Let's give you a roadmap for scaling. And here's some titles, and some of them you may be very familiar with. I mean, who hasn't heard of, the product analyst, for example? We need data analysts. We need governance,
Mm-hmm.
business analysts. That's so common, right?
Yeah.
Uh, community of practice. I've never heard of that before. But in terms of what that really means, a little bit different, a little bit of a surprise here.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, after we talk about, okay, these are your team members that you want to bring on, these are some different areas that you might want to focus on in product operations. Then they moved kind of talking about, okay, how are these people set up within the org? Because, initially when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about the product operations team, which services all of the different departments. And they brought up in an earlier section that, sometimes embedded teams work better. For example, maybe every team, the data team has a dedicated product ops manager, the marketing team has a dedicated product ops manager, and so we kind of have these two different models, three if you count hybrid, so kind of somewhere in between. And they're saying that, like a lot of things with product management, one method isn't always the best. One method won't work for every organization.
Not a one
So
size fits all.
yes, that's the phrase. Thank you. Yeah, not one size fits all. So I like this chart that they have on page 200, which talks about pros, cons, and when you might need these different types of models. So, when does it make sense to have that one centralized shared service model versus embedding them versus having a little bit of both? Um, and I like the fact that, yeah, breaking down pros and cons, kind of seeing what are some of the potentials for this, but also what are some things we need to look out for. Um, and I almost think you could use the cons section if you have a product ops team and you're experiencing some difficulties. Maybe you could use that to do some troubleshooting. Because I've definitely seen some of those issues, in my own teams, in different orgs and stuff like that. So cool to see that, and good to see that they're not pushing one model over another. Because I really think it does depend on what situation you find yourself in.
That's a good point. A lot of times when you have models being explained, particularly when they're new, and the reader or the audience may not fully understand it, the subject matter expert can tend to sell it to you
Hmm.
and just kind of say, well, this is a solution for every situation. You just need to buy in and roll with it. But yeah, to point out that this may not always be the best solution for you, but in these instances, the pros, you definitely want to consider it. And then here's how you want to approach it. So how you might want to approach it from an embedded teams or a centralized or a hybrid perspective. However, some things to look out for, because in your particular scenario instant, or that use case, it may not necessarily be the optimal, and we just want to kind of make you aware of that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So from there, we have another case study, and these are great to see all of these practices in real life. I think it's always helpful to see that. Um, and so here we see Blake Samick coming in and having had experience with product operations at Stripe, kind of talking about at Uber. How do you go standing up that product ops organization, going from one person selling the concept, getting those easy wins, and then starting to build. So I know we're a little short on time today, so I'm just going to kind of skim through. Um, but it was great to see some of the initiatives that Samick put forward to not only help with some of those, um, like we said, easy wins, low hanging fruit that they talked about teams having user feedback coming from a lot of different angles, so building out that one source of truth, um, and talking about the product being complex, you got information coming from a lot of different spaces. So showing not only why product ops is important, but specifically why they needed to scale. And yeah, it was good to see that, how he made a case for product operations. And oh, this is one thing I wanted to talk about. Not only selling product operations, but indicating what more investment would unlock. And I really like that phrase because I think it speaks more to potential rather than, we don't have enough budget, which obviously doesn't play very well at senior leadership level usually. So this idea that here's what we're doing now, here's what we're doing with this amount of resources, people, um, and here's what we could do if we had additional staff, additional resources. And um Sam kind of mentions this is a free service to a paid model, which I think is a kind of easy way to understand it and a great way to connect it here. And just like a product, we're selling them on the value. So, showing, okay, here's where we are with product ops, here's some of the stuff that we've done. If we put this much money into it, if we add this many people to the team, here's some of the things that we could accomplish. And, aside from just being a great way to pitch it, an understandable way, I think that this is a very product minded way to do it. So I think it makes sense to a lot of people who might start standing this up in their orgs. And yeah, that just covers a little bit more on, based on this model, what can you do for building and scaling? They talk about discussing future growth now, which I think is always good. Have a mind toward the future and what the org might be like. Specifically, like we say, when you're the first hire, what will that look like when you bring more people on? Always have to think about that, even if it's just you at first. Creating a charter, again, since you're setting that foundation and you're creating the network for a lot of things that will grow in the future. Just mapping out, they say, the core responsibilities. Um, so I think that's great. And deciding on the right organization structure. So we talked about which of those models works for you. Even if you end up switching it to something else later on, why are we choosing this one now? Not just like roll the dice, pick one, but having a specific reason why we're choosing that.
I'm sorry, my mic was muted in your last pause. I was just affirming that yeah, definitely that was a great observation. You didn't
Okay.
hear me. But yeah, no, you're right. Being able to understand the or do an assessment as to what model may be optimal is definitely a good tip to have because who knows? I mean, this is such a new concept. We're used to the project approach, and we have our preconceived notions as to what that might need to look like or feel like, or how we might want to approach it, or what the structure may need to be. And once again, they chime in and say, well, be wary of your conventional way of thinking at this because this is a slightly different mindset.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to give you some tips on how you might want to consider your structure. So very insightful point.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I think this just, we're I like the fact that they go from examples to takeaways to how you can implement it. And, just to quickly cover the end of this section, we go back to the storyline they've been using to kind of help us understand this process from beginning to end. And we're kind of at a point where they've started scaling. They're getting permission to keep one of the members of their team that they borrowed, like we said before, internal hires first. And kind of what they've done, those quick wins, and how they're going to scale in the next quarter of their business. So, really cool here to see them planning for the future, like we just talked about, and kind of what they're doing next based on the challenges that they've encountered and how the organization has reacted. So, really cool to see the actual details and minutia more than just an overall perspective. Um, and they close out the section talking about how you want to get started. So um, some kind of reflective questions for you and your team on who are we looking for, what do we put in that job description, how do we know when we found that person. And so again, really helpful guide, I think, to start this. um, and like you were saying, ways to tailor it to your organization and make sure it's a good fit. And also, I really like that you mentioned, this is slightly different mindset. So how do we make sure that our mindset matches our goals and what we're doing?
That is an important thing because when you hear product and product management, product owner, I think many of us that have experience in that area, we have an idea what that looks and feels like.
Hmm.
But operations is slightly different, or maybe even largely different in some instances. So yeah, it's really good that they pause and give us a few things to think about from the operation standpoint so we can be really effective in our way of thinking about this and strategizing to be successful in implementing it. And
Yeah.
I do think that probably increases our chances of really making that conversion from what we think project
Yeah.
management or product management looks and feels like to what project operations really can be in order for it to be impactful and effective.
Yes, absolutely. And with that, we wrapped up the last major section of the book. And so now we get to take a look at the entire picture, which I think is going to be really exciting, tie all these pieces together. But at this point, we've gone from why do we need product ops to how do we build out a full product ops team. So, been a really great journey so far. Like I said, can't wait to pull this all together at the end. And I think we have one more session left on our book.
All right, yeah. We'll use that to kind of connect the dots and tie it all together, and then get some thoughts on launching into building upon all of this amazing information that we've been discussing about products over the past several weeks with this and the other books, and continuing on that journey to give us even some more insights. But look forward to that connecting the dots component next time we get together.
Yep. All right. See everyone next week.
Looking forward to it.